Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the foreign policy challenges of US President Barack Obama in the context of his latest State of the Union address. The State of the Union address is made to a joint session of the Senate and the House of Representatives of the US Congress. It's an occasion for the US President to present a report to the Congress on the condition of the nation, his legislative agenda, America's view of the world, and how the US proposes to engage with the world. There is a large domestic focus to it. However, today we will examine the foreign policy aspects of President Obama's address at a time when the US has tended to avoid new conventional wars, when it is winding down in Afghanistan, responding cautiously to the Iraq crisis, opening up to Cuba, and when it wants negotiations with Iran to succeed. To understand the foreign policy challenges facing the United States, I have with me three eminent experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, one of India's most distinguished diplomats. He was Foreign Secretary of India and also India's ambassador to Russia, France, Turkey and Egypt. We have my old friend Dr. C. Rajamohan, well-known strategic affairs expert and author of seminal books on foreign policy. He is one of our foremost commentators on foreign policy. He is currently a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, a think tank in New Delhi. Dr. Chinatamani Mahapatra, he is professor and chairman at the Center for Canadian, US and Latin American Studies, the School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi, an eminent expert on Indo-US relations and US foreign policy. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ms. Sibal, let me begin with you. Would you say that President Obama enters his penultimate year of presidency much as he began it? The challenges around the world haven't gone away and the political opposition at home is still difficult to please.
I think when he began, he had a lot of goodwill and he was in many ways remained a bit of a star in politics and a lot of expectations, and he had a persona that invited support, respect, and in some cases admiration in some parts of the world. Yeah. But today he is quite unpopular at home. His Democratic base is unhappy with him. The Republicans are totally opposed to him and are confronting him in every way possible. And the rest of the world feels that he hasn't lived up to his promise, and that although he got a Nobel Peace Prize when he began his first term in the hope that he would be a peace president, in actual fact, if you look at his record, he's been involved in more wars than even Bush in some ways. And he has used military means to resolve many of the problems, though of course there are in other ways he has withdrawn troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, etc., etc. But now he's had to go back to Iraq, and the future in Afghanistan seems uncertain. On the whole, I think at this point in time, his record is not something that he can be proud of.
Okay. Raj, why is it being said that when it comes to foreign policy, the Republicans may be President Obama's best allies rather than the Democrats?
No, I think the divisions within the US Congress are not often along the party lines. For example, on trade issues, the Democrats liberal Democrats tend to be more opposed to free trade, while the Republicans are generally in favor of liberal trading arrangements. On intervention, again, it breaks on different lines. For example, use of military force beyond borders, where you have both the liberal interventionists on the Democratic side, as well as the neocons on the Republican side, tend to be more supportive of use of force. But the isolationists on the right, as well as those who say, look, more oriented towards peace and withdrawal, they tend to, again, across the parties, tend to support more restrained policies. So I think it's really, my sense is, look, the last 2 years, I think, actually gives them more freedom. Although the Congress is now controlled by
freedom with effectiveness, or freedom to say things and not get it implemented?
No, I think he'll have more freedom. I mean, on trade, of course, without the Congress you can't do much. But on a large number of areas where you don't need congressional action, for example, on India, where there is bilateral consensus within the Congress in favor of India, so where you can actually, it's only about pushing bureaucracy and getting things done, he can do it. For example, on the nuclear thing, we got it all done under Bush in the last 2 years. So I think my sense is, having done something on Cuba, which you mentioned, I think he can take bolder steps, which does not involve significant legislative support.
Dr. Mahapatra, do you agree with Raj when he says he can take bolder steps? Do you think he can take bolder steps because in 2015, Obama is free from the shackles of past emergencies. America has some troops overseas, but Afghanistan and Iraq war have virtually ended. Russia's currency has collapsed. You can claim victory against Putin. You are opening up to Cuba and, going gung-ho with the nuclear negotiations with Iran.
Whenever somebody becomes the president of the US, he has both the challenges and the opportunities. During his term, last 6 years, he faced a lot of challenges. How the Russians began to flex the muscle, the Chinese began to flex the muscle, the ISIS was created and the ISIS expanded its influence. American bombing could not achieve anything. In Afghanistan, he wanted to wind up the war, but the Taliban is becoming more resilient. So you have a lot many challenges. He could not do much about Libya. Libya is more unstable than before. So even in Egypt, he was dilly-dallying. On Syria, he made a lot of promises, could not deliver. One can have a series of, challenges like this, which are continuing. If you see the other side, when he came to power, the economy was down, the recession was in, and he had to bail out many American companies. But today, the US economy is back on the rail. It appears to be rebounding, and a 5% growth in the last quarter. The Chinese economy has entered into a phase of slow growth. So, and the Russian economy is going down the drain.
But on foreign policy, does he have greater freedom today than he had in the past?
Certainly no doubt about it, because many people say that Obama has become lame duck. He is not on foreign policy matters. On foreign policy matters, a president can take decision even on the last day of being in the office.
Yeah.
So I think he has more opportunities. He wants to do something with Iran. He wants to engage India in a very big way.
Yeah.
And he is dealing with China in a more positive note now.
We will discuss all of these in greater detail. But let me come to you, Ambassador Sibal. So while Obama has pledged that he would not send more combat troops to Iraq, could the fight against the Islamic State actually gradually draw more American forces on the ground? And has this already not been happening?
Well, when you say more forces on the ground, it depends. Yes, he has had to send many more troops to Iraq. There is aerial bombardment that is going on. But I think he will not, increase the U.S. troop presence on the ground to actually start doing the fighting. And maybe it's not required. I think the objective is to try and slowly decimate ISIL, squeeze its territorial hold, and he's got this coalition that he has built up, and probably he might feel that this is enough for the present. In the sense, it is clear that the ISIL threat has been contained, it has not been eliminated, but unfortunately there is this other side to it. His support for the moderates, so-called moderates in Syria, is sending 1,000 trainers to all sorts of places. There is a bit of contradiction in his policy, and that might actually finally lead to a lot of complications for the United States and for others.
Raj, when Obama in his State of the Union address called for smarter kind of US leadership and combining military power and stronger diplomacy, what did he mean? Would you say that he was emphasizing his preference for diplomacy over military intervention? And where military intervention is required, not unilateralism, but building alliances? And haven't we seen that happening in Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, and even in Afghanistan?
So I think, to his credit, I think what Obama has done is, for all the criticism that look, he's weak, he's vacillating and is leading from behind, etc. I think he's definitively ended a period of mindless assertiveness on the global stage. I think which reached a peak under Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan. That look, the US needs to be more restrained in its use of force abroad. Because both the liberals, as I said, as well as the neocons, were saying American power could be put to good use. So when it tells the US Congress, look, when I took power, there were 180,000 troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, but today there are only 15,000. He's saying that, look, he's going to be the president who's ended the wars. Does it stop using force? No. He's still using some force in Syria and various places where indirect. So I think the combination is going to be, look, no ground troops, light military footprint abroad, support others in case you have partners to take more responsibility and to build coalitions. I think this will give, America more freedom of action rather than the kind of expansive, assertive foreign policy that we saw under Bush.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break at this point. Don't go away. We'll be back with you soon. Stay with us.
Bhulaiya, a labyrinth of hundreds of narrow stairway passages, is a significant and historical component of what you popularly know as Bara Imambara. Some of these narrow stairways have dead ends, some end at precipitous drops, while others lead to entrance or exit points. Historically, Bhul Bhulaiya was constructed to confuse the enemy intruder, and the narrow lanes of the labyrinth can make anyone feel lost. The structure contains various strategically built hollows in the corridors.
Welcome back. We are looking at the foreign policy challenges of US President Barack Obama. Professor Mahapatra, how successful is President Obama's overture to Cuba going to be? Would he be able to persuade Congress to withdraw the economic sanctions against Cuba?
Withdrawing economic sanctions against Cuba will be, I think, difficult. It will take some more time. But he has taken a lot of executive measures, executive orders. In fact, if you see, 90% of the time the American presidents use executive orders to bypass the pressure from the Congress, and he has done that. It is a good beginning, and the American businessmen are really very excited about doing business in Cuba. This is a paradigm change in America's engagement with Latin America. And Cuba, if you see from the other side also, Cuba needs America because the kind of support Cuba was getting from Venezuela has dried up, oil prices are down, Venezuelan economy is going down. So the time has come where they want to, take a new page, turn a new page in relationship with Cuba. And even the Cuban Americans, the exiles who are there in the US, the new generation, they have a different outlook altogether. So that is why he is doing a pretty good job. Okay. And Congress will support, but pretty slowly.
Yeah. Raj, the Republicans and the Democrats, some of the Democrats are proposing two legislations to oppose Obama on Iran. And he's threatened to veto any new sanctions against Iran. So do you think to get congressional support, he would have to show quick success? That is before his self-imposed deadline of June 30th. And would he be able to take Saudi Arabia and the Israelis along with him?
So exactly. And I think one of the definitive parts of his speech was really this, that look, warning the Congress that look, you impose sanctions now, when I'm in the middle of a serious diplomacy, that's going to lead us to war, that's going to make it more difficult to deal with to achieve the objectives of a nuclear weapon-free Iran. So I think he's confronting them, but he has to divide the coalition between the left and the right within the Congress, because you have the Jewish lobby, you have the non-proliferation guys, you have the muscular wallahs on all sides have got together. So he has to then need a sufficient partnership from Iran. Actually say, look, I've got a good deal. If we can tell people, I've got a good deal, this will help us avoid war, then I think he'll get popular support.
But that deal has to come before June 30th.
Exactly. No, that's what, the time is running out. I mean, that, whether, again, Iran has the same problems. That do they take the plunge by showing flexibility, or do they take the hard line? Okay. So I think in both the cases, the extremists are in a position to shoot it down. So therefore, it comes down to the leadership of Obama and the Iranian leadership to say, look, how do they move it forward?
Well, Sibal, how would you assess the trajectory of US-Russia relations, which were given a so-called fresh start by Obama in 2009? And in this State of the Union address, he's actually hailing the fact that he's isolated Russia. So has Russia's economy and Russia politically, has it been marginalized because of US policy and what it did in, the Russians did in Crimea, or is it because of the plunging of the international oil prices?
I think it's very clear he has a very antagonistic policy towards Russia. Frankly, the West is responsible for the crisis in Ukraine, and they've exploited it to the hilt to weaken Russia geopolitically further. They've imposed these sanctions, which are exacting a heavy price, and the Russian leadership is acknowledging that they're in a difficult situation. But they're saying that they have gone through these sanctions before, and the nation is united behind this, and they will suffer the pain, and they'll come out strongly because the sanctions will also force them to become a little more autonomous in terms of the economy and production at home of some of the things that they have been importing because of high oil prices, etc., etc. The fall in oil prices is obviously exacting a huge toll of the Russian economy, which is going to actually have a decline of maybe 2 or 3% next year. But I think this kind of gloating that I saw in the State of Union address, that people thought that Putin was masterful in his diplomacy after his aggression against Ukraine, and now his economy is in tatters. It doesn't behove the President of the United States to talk like this about one of the foremost global powers, and the mindset is all wrong. And that is, to my mind, a very big question mark on Obama's way of thinking, that on the one hand he wants to present himself as somebody who wants to draw down tensions and act responsibility, and etc., etc. And on the other hand, he's creating these very sharp divisions which are very reminiscent of the Cold War in Europe.
Exactly. So what does it do to US-Russia relationship, or do you see the beginning of a new Cold War?
This is a very bad shape, but Russia can't afford a new Cold War. Its effort will be continue to try and drive some sort of a wedge between Europe and United States, and have a softer posture towards Europe, and also try and engage the United States to the extent they can. The Russians are aware of their vulnerabilities, but they have been pushed beyond a point where actually self-respect demands that they stand up.
Raj, let's talk about China for a bit. China used to serve Obama's State of the Union address as the job-stealing boogeyman. But this time around, he's presenting it as, as a climate change leader, saying that I went to Beijing and China has now agreed under my persuasion to cut carbon emissions. Obama, the environmentalist. But the same Obama at home has actually been encouraging fracking. 1 million extra dollars of US oil is coming into the market, increasing the world's dependence on hydrocarbons, therefore leading to greater carbon emission, greater climate change. The environment hasn't become greener, you haven't reversed climate change or tried to reverse it, and the jobs you claimed that were stolen, they haven't come back either. So what is this policy?
I think on China, what we've seen in the last 6 years is really repeated shifts in the way Obama tried to deal with them. For example, in the first year, they said, look, China is the most important relationship. We're going to have a G2. There is going to be a new way in which US and China will work together. And then he went there in 2009, but he got wrapped on his knuckles with the Chinese thought America is on decline. So you saw the same president then in 2010 beginning to announce the pivot to Asia. Essentially saying, look, we're going to take on the Chinese, we're going to find a way to balance China in Asia. So you had a complete reversal. But in the beginning of this, I think the second term, what we've seen is that, look, a more complicated policy where, given China's growing power, one, on the military side, you have to continue to find ways to deal with them. In fact, there are continuing tensions every day in the East China Sea, in the South China Sea, between the American Navy and the Chinese forces. So that is going on. There's more tension between American allies like Japan, Philippines on the one side, and the Chinese on the other. But at the same time, on global issues, like you mentioned, climate change, because he's so committed to getting something done on climate change, I think Chinese have taken advantage.
Why doesn't he do something himself? Why increase fracking and shale oil production?
No, of course, fracking doesn't do the carbon emissions, but I think...
No, but cheap oil does. Because
oil,
you consume more
still, of it. Yeah, but in fact, forget oil. I mean, they export coal to China. But the deal that they did, you're talking about 2035. I mean, somewhere down the road. But given China's weight in the international system and the multilateral domain, in the United Nations, in dealing with Iran, you need their support. So I think it's a more complex policy where.
Is it in disarray or is it a more sophisticated policy?
No, it's not disarray. I think the Chinese power itself compels all its interlocutors to deal with them. They know easy answers to deal with Chinese power.
Okay, we need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Don't go away.
भानु अथैया अकादमी अवार्ड अपने नाम करने वाली पहली भारतीय महिला। सिने उद्योग की इस सफलतम ड्रेस डिजाइनर ने किए हैं करीब 130 फिल्मों के कॉस्ट्यूम तैयार। 1956 में फिल्म सीआईडी से करियर का आगाज किया और 1982 में रिचर्ड एटनबरो की गांधी के लिए जीता ऑस्कर। 1991 में फिल्म लेकिन और सन 2002 में लगान के लिए मिला राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार।
Welcome back. We're discussing the foreign policy challenges facing President Barack Obama of the United States. Well, Sibal, you wanted to say something on US-China policy?
To underscore what you said, because in his State of the Union address, he boasted that the United States has become the biggest oil and gas producer in the world. And he mentioned China a couple of times quite pointedly in terms of bringing jobs back home. So there is this sense that the United States or the president has to do a lot to make sure, as part of his policy of rejuvenating the US economy, that the Chinese economic challenge has to be met, and all the jobs that shifted to United States, manufacturing jobs, should be brought back home.
They haven't been brought back though.
No, what I mean is that China is being targeted. Okay, on climate change, they've had some kind of an understanding which serves.
But the other problems remain.
The other major problems remain.
Let's talk about India, Professor Mahapatra. Do you think Barack Obama being invited as chief guest to India's 65th Republic Day anniversary, so the shift away from what some people call India's old-fashioned foreign policy, old-style foreign policy of non-alignment? So has India recognize that it needs to show a more strategic relationship towards the US than it did before?
You know, India has stopped following non-alignment for a long time, for decades. If you really make the nitty-gritty details about India's foreign
strategic
policy.
autonomy, let's say.
But strategic autonomy, inviting Barack Obama, I believe, is a great out-of-the-box thinking by the Indian Prime Minister. It never occurred to any Prime Minister that the leader of the oldest and the most powerful democracy should be invited to celebrate democracy on 26th of January, Republic Day parade. But this symbol is also the substance, as you said very correctly, that India is moving closer towards the United States. It doesn't mean that India is selling itself out to the US and become an alliance partner. India will never ever become an alliance partner in the traditional sense of the term. But the time has come where we must engage the most powerful economically, militarily country in the world, and that is good for India. This is what Narendra Modi, when talks about make in India and digital India and needs technology from abroad, and again loses, he has increased the percentage of foreign direct investment in India. It all means he wants to do business with all major powers, including the United States.
Okay. Raj, India and US are bound together by several common interests, like containing China's growing power, coordinating in Afghanistan post-American pullout, the need for maritime security in Asia, etc. So do you think a deeper defense relationship can be in the long-term interests of both India and the US?
Absolutely, and I think what we've seen in the last 10 years is a steady expansion of the relationship. While tentative steps were started under the Congress government under Narasimha Rao, what we saw then, little increase under Vajpayee, then really taking off after the Manmohan Singh government signed the 2005 defense agreement. So the last 10 years we've seen more sale of American equipment, which has given us a nice play in a sense. You're not just dependent on one supplier anymore. More the merrier, your leverage goes up with the Russians, with the French and with the Americans in a very interesting way. But I think the challenge is now to go to the next step. I mean, how do you do more things together to achieve the strategic objectives? There I think our system, I don't know if it is ready to engage in a more expansive thing, but my sense is politically today, given what Professor Mahapatra talked about, there's greater confidence in Delhi that India feels this is not about non-alignment, this is about getting India's influence increase. So I think a stronger cooperation with the US will open more opportunities with China, with Japan, with Australia, and a whole range of other countries.
Well, Sibal, would you say that by doing more defense business with India, the United States can actually help Prime Minister Modi fulfill his twin objectives, one of military modernization and secondly of upgrading defense technology? And in turn, India can provide more business to US defense companies and becomes America's strategic democratic counterweight in Asia. Is that what America wants, and is that what India wants?
I don't accept that line of thinking at all. There are certain areas where you might be compelled to go to the United States because of its huge political, military, economic and other power. You must have good relations with the United States, and if you can build a strategic component, it's all very well and we should do it. But in terms of defense, we don't have to really go to the United States in any big way. It's not as if we don't have options. We have the Russian option, the Israeli option, we have the European option. And all the things that we actually need, or most of the things that we need, can be obtained from these sources. But yes, if you want to have a strategic relationship with the United States, then there ought to be some military relationship, not only hardware, but also in terms of exercise that I support. But to believe, as your question implies, that for military modernization we need the United States, I think that's a false premise, and we land ourselves in great problem in the future. In fact, if you become too closer in terms of dependence on the United States on military hardware, and it's not an interest to destroy the military industry in Europe also by distancing ourselves away from there and giving this primacy to the US defense industry.
Professor Mahapatra, let's talk about economic relations. Do you think, despite the India-US economic ties expanding to almost $100 billion over the last decade, the US getting a $9 billion defense business from India, there's still a drift in the relationship?
It's not a drift. We have to see from both the sides. You know, in 2000, the Indian investment in the US was 300 million.
Yeah.
And by 2013, it was 9 billion. That means 30 times more. So the trade is beneficial to both the sides. India for a long time has been running a trade surplus vis-a-vis the United States. So there are areas where we have problems like IPR, for instance. There are areas where we have problem for bilateral investment treaty. The Americans want more opening up of the Indian market. This is where we are going to negotiate.
My question really was that, are business relations suffering because of uncertainty on the political side?
I don't think so. This is one thing great about the Indian diplomacy, that as and when we have problems in other areas, our business relationship with important trade partners continue. When Debjani Khobragade issue really created a lot of problems diplomatically between the two countries, that did not lead to a standstill in the trade and other areas of cooperation.
All right. Raj, so do you think these intractable or seemingly intractable issues of some US corporations running campaigns against India on IPR, on trade and investment, the investigations against India on these issues, US restrictions on IT personnel, do you think they will be easily resolved, or do you think they're intractable issues?
No, I think nothing is intractable actually. I think what this government is signaling, that is Mr. Modi's government is signaling a pragmatic, practical approach of dealing with the Americans. Now, dealing with Americans on trade and economic issues is complicated. Look, the best trade partners like Japan, Europe have constant problems. The trick is not to do this ideological argumentation. Our traditional socialist, non-aligned, self-reliant arguments that used to go on. You got to practically deal with issues like on IPR. It was a farmer issue. But the aerospace industry wants to work with you. It is about playing the internal dynamic and find ways in which you find partners within the US. So don't treat the US as a black box. Look for partners within the structure of the US.
We are running out of time, but last word to you. I mean, I would have wanted to ask you on some of these issues, but how do you see the trajectory of Indo-US relations, given all these issues? As Raj says, there are normal issues between two trading partners.
Well, they're not so much normal issues when you come to relations between India and the United States, because the stakes on India as a developing country or a country in transition are very high. And therefore, the compromises that the US wants to impose on us can cost us very dearly. And therefore, there will be natural resistance. It's not necessarily ideological. It's simply trying to protect your interest against a country which wants to impose its way of doing things and its ideas and its practices on you. In many ways, it can be helpful. But accelerating the process to a point where actually it doesn't serve our interests at this point in time is a problem for us. But on the whole, I think the trajectory is positive, and it should be positive because there's a lot to be gained from a very good relationship with the United States. But we have to be cautious and not get bowled over by the fact that the United States is a great power and wants to help you. No country wants to help you. They will help you only to the extent that they help their own interests. And if you are clear-sighted about this, you can build a good relationship.
Thank you. We've run out of time, so we'll have to end the discussion here. I'd like to thank Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, Dr. C. Rajamohan, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal for participating in this discussion. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week, of course, as usual. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching.